What you're about to hear isn't the sanitized version found in textbooks or official recruitment videos. According to declassified military records and first-hand sniper testimonies, some of the most dangerous moments of America's secret war in Southeast Asia happened without a single shot being fired. No muzzle flash. No warning. Just silence and then consequences. Military after-action reports from covert operations in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia reveal a disturbing pattern. Elite American snipers were being exposed, compromised, and eliminated by forces they couldn't see, hear, or immediately identify. At first, commanders blamed fatigue. Then poor positioning. Eventually, the truth became impossible to ignore. The jungle itself was acting like an enemy combatant. Pay close attention now. Because this is the side of war few are willing to discuss, not the firefights, not the kill counts, but the psychological erosion that begins when the environment stops being neutral and starts watching you back. When these men arrived, they believed they understood hostile terrain. They had trained in deserts, mountains, and simulated forests back home. On paper, the Southeast Asian jungle was just another operational variable: heat, humidity, dense vegetation. Manageable. Survivable. That illusion didn't last long. Snipers deployed into the jungle quickly realized that traditional doctrines failed here. The rules of concealment they depended on began to collapse. Camouflage patterns dissolved into meaningless colors. Movement, even when mathematically minimal, triggered reactions they couldn't predict. A blade of grass bent the wrong way. A bird stopped calling. Insects swarmed at the worst possible moment, not randomly, but seemingly on cue. According to field logs, some sniper teams reported feeling observed hours before any confirmed enemy presence. Not through sight or sound, but through subtle environmental shifts. The air felt heavier. The jungle quieter. A pressure that couldn't be quantified, only felt. This wasn't paranoia. Later intelligence assessments would confirm that enemy forces had learned to weaponize the environment itself, exploiting its natural behaviors in ways that bypassed American technological superiority. But early on, snipers were left alone with the sensation that something was wrong, without knowing what. One declassified report from a long-range reconnaissance patrol describes a sniper lying motionless for over 9 hours. No shots fired. No targets acquired. Yet by extraction, his position had been compromised. How? The report lists no sound, no visible movement, no communication error. Just one line stands out: environmental indicators altered unexpectedly. That phrase appears again and again in documents from the period. Silent. Subtle. Fatal. The jungle didn't attack directly. It betrayed. Leaves retained heat longer than expected, outlining human shapes after sunset. Moisture clung to rifle barrels, causing microscopic reflections at dawn. Even breathing patterns changed the behavior of insects, creating faint disturbances that trained enemy observers could read like signals. Snipers began to understand that patience, their greatest strength, had become a liability. The longer they stayed still, the more the jungle interacted with them. Sweat pooled. Skin reacted. Ants crawled. Leeches attached. And every reaction carried risk. Veterans later described the terror of not being able to trust stillness anymore. One former Marine sniper recalled, "You stop moving to stay alive." But out there, staying still was what got you noticed. This realization marked a turning point. The jungle was no longer a backdrop. It was an active participant. And worse, it never slept. As missions continued, this invisible pressure began to erode decision-making. Snipers hesitated longer than doctrine allowed. They broke concealment too early. Or stayed too long. Every choice felt wrong, because the enemy wasn't just in front of them. It was beneath them. Around them. Breathing with them. Psychological evaluations conducted after rotations showed elevated stress markers even in engagements with zero enemy contact. The threat wasn't confrontation. It was anticipation. The constant awareness that something unseen could expose you at any second, without warning, without sound. This was only the beginning. Because once American forces realized the jungle could betray them, the enemy learned how to make it do so on purpose. According to declassified counter-sniper analyses, the enemy didn't need advanced optics to locate American marksmen. They needed patience and an understanding of the jungle that went far beyond maps or training manuals. What US snipers initially interpreted as random environmental behavior was, in many cases, a language. One the jungle spoke fluently. And one the enemy had learned to read. Military intelligence reports from late-phase operations show a shift in enemy detection methods. Instead of scanning for movement or sound, opposing forces began observing patterns. The absence of noise. The wrong kind of silence. A disruption in routines so subtle that only someone raised in that environment would notice. Pay attention to this part. Because this is where the jungle stopped being dangerous and started being intelligent. One of the earliest indicators came from insects. Snipers reported sudden swarms of ants, mosquitoes, and flies converging on their hides without explanation. At first, it was dismissed as coincidence. But later field interviews revealed something unsettling. Enemy scouts could identify concealed human presence by watching insect behavior change. Human sweat altered chemical traces in the air. Breath introduced heat and moisture. Even sealed rations emitted scents foreign to the jungle. Insects reacted instantly and predictably. When they clustered unnaturally, it signaled intrusion. A sniper could remain perfectly still for hours, only to be betrayed by a cloud of insects that refused to behave normally. Silent. Unavoidable. Exposing. Veteran testimonies describe the psychological toll of this realization. One Army sniper recalled lying prone as ants crawled into his ears and nose. He didn't move. He couldn't. Any reaction would be worse than the pain. You start negotiating with your own body, he said. You're not fighting the enemy. You're fighting instinct. But insects were only the beginning. Vegetation itself became a signal system. Jungle plants, accustomed to specific rhythms of wind, rain, and animal movement, reacted differently to human presence. A snapped vine didn't always spring back. Leaves displaced by a rifle barrel reflected light at unnatural angles. Even the compression of soil beneath a body altered how water pooled after rainfall. Enemy observers learned to read these signs the way a tracker reads footprints. One declassified Marine Corps report details a sniper position compromised after a light drizzle. The rain didn't reveal movement, it revealed absence. Every surface darkened uniformly, except for one elongated shape where a body had blocked the water. From a distance, it looked like a shadow that shouldn't exist. A perfect silhouette. Fatal. As this knowledge spread among enemy units, the jungle became a passive alarm system. No radios. No signals. Just observation and time. Snipers were no longer hunted aggressively. They were waited out. This introduced a new form of terror, the sense that exposure was inevitable. American doctrine emphasized patience, discipline, and endurance. But the jungle punished endurance. The longer a sniper remained in position, the more environmental anomalies accumulated. Heat signatures. Moisture patterns. Biological reactions. Commanders began noticing a pattern in casualty reports. Many sniper losses occurred after extended periods of inactivity, not during engagement, but during observation. The kill shot came only after the jungle had already given them away. Psychologically, this reversed the sniper's role. Instead of predator, they became prey, immobilized by their own training. Field psychologists noted increasing reports of hypervigilance. Snipers fixated on minor sensory changes. A leaf falling. A bird stopping mid-call. The absence of sound became more frightening than gunfire. Because silence meant observation. And observation meant time was running out. By this stage of the war, the jungle wasn't just assisting the enemy. It was teaching them. And the most dangerous lessons were still to come, lessons that would turn patience itself into a trap. What made the jungle truly lethal wasn't just that it revealed sniper positions. It was that it began to shape behavior. According to operational debriefings, enemy forces studied how American snipers reacted to environmental stress and then designed traps that exploited those reactions, not through force, but through inevitability. This is where things become deeply unsettling. Because many of the most effective traps weren't mechanical. They were psychological, built into the environment itself. Pay close attention now. Snipers were trained to distrust obvious danger. Tripwires, punji pits, pressure plates. Those were expected. What they weren't prepared for were traps that looked like relief. One declassified after-action report describes a sniper relocating after hours of insect harassment and heat exhaustion. He shifted position by less than 2 meters, a textbook micro-adjustment. Within minutes, he triggered a concealed alarm made not of wire, but of tensioned vines connected to suspended seed pods. When disturbed, the pods released a cascade of dry husks that fell unnaturally, signaling movement without sound. No explosion. No noise. Just confirmation. Enemy observers didn't rush the position. They waited. Another tactic exploited hydration needs. Jungle streams appeared clean, calm, untouched. But intelligence later confirmed that some water sources near known sniper routes were deliberately altered. Not poisoned, contaminated just enough to cause stomach distress hours later. The timing was intentional. Symptoms hit during long observation periods, forcing snipers to move, break concealment, or abandon position under pressure. Movement exposed them. Hesitation killed them. Veterans described the humiliation of this kind of trap. "You weren't beaten by firepower," one said. "You were beaten by your own body failing at the worst moment." Then there were the dead zones. Areas of jungle that felt wrong. Too quiet. Too undisturbed. Snipers learned to avoid them instinctively until orders or terrain forced them through. These zones weren't mined. They didn't need to be. They were observed corridors. Enemy units learned that Americans avoided obvious hazards. So they left certain paths untouched. Clean. Open. Almost inviting. The jungle there behaved normally until a human entered it. Then everything changed at once. Birds scattered. Insects surged. Vegetation shifted in patterns that couldn't be blamed on wind. It was a signal flare without light. One sniper team reported sensing exposure before any contact. Minutes later, the first shot came from a direction they hadn't even considered viable. Elevated. Oblique. Perfectly timed. Sudden. Precise. Unforgiving. As these encounters accumulated, something critical happened inside the minds of the snipers. They began to distrust relief. Comfort became suspicious. Stillness became dangerous. Movement became a gamble. Psychological assessments later showed increased decision paralysis. Snipers delayed actions even when doctrine demanded immediate response. They questioned their own instincts. Every choice felt like a trap waiting to be sprung. The jungle didn't need to attack constantly. It just needed to threaten constantly. This state of unresolved danger created a slow mental collapse. Sleep deprivation worsened. Hallucinations increased. Veterans reported hearing movements that weren't there and missing the ones that were. One former Army sniper summarized it simply: you stop asking where the enemy is. You start asking what the jungle wants you to do. And that was the most dangerous shift of all. Because once the environment controls your decisions, you're already compromised. By the later stages of these operations, U.S. sniper doctrine in Southeast Asia had quietly changed, not because of new weapons or tactics, but because silence itself had become unstable. According to classified psychological evaluations and field adaptations, absolute stillness was no longer protection. It was exposure delayed. This is where the jungle completed its transformation from terrain into weapon. Snipers depended on silence the way infantry depended on armor. Every movement was calculated. Every breath controlled. But in the jungle, silence created a vacuum and the environment rushed to fill it with signals. Birds avoided unnatural quiet. Monkeys altered their patrol patterns. Even wind moved differently through vegetation when a human mass interrupted airflow for long periods. These were not details taught in American training manuals. But they were second nature to those who had lived there their entire lives. Enemy units learned something critical: total silence stood out. One declassified CIA field memo describes local scouts identifying sniper hides by listening for what wasn't there. No insects. No birds. No small animal movement. Just a dead pocket of jungle. A void. And voids attract attention. Veteran snipers later described the creeping dread of realizing that their discipline was betraying them. The more perfectly they executed their training, the more alien they became to the environment around them. Silent. Isolated. Marked. This forced impossible choices. Snipers began introducing controlled movement, intentional imperfections, to appear natural. A slow shift. A slight sound. A calculated disturbance meant to blend in rather than disappear. But this came at a cost. Breaking silence increased the risk of immediate detection. Maintaining silence increased the risk of delayed exposure. There was no correct answer, only trade-offs. Operational stress reports show a spike in anxiety disorders during this phase. Snipers described feeling trapped inside their own bodies, hyper-aware of every involuntary function. Heartbeats felt too loud. Swallowing felt dangerous. Even blinking became a conscious act. One Marine sniper wrote in his debrief, "You're not hiding from the enemy anymore. You're hiding from yourself." The psychological damage accumulated slowly but relentlessly. Extended missions produced dissociation, a sense of detachment from reality. Some snipers reported feeling like they were dissolving into the jungle, losing a clear sense of time and self. Others experienced the opposite, the sensation that the jungle was closing in, breathing, waiting. Neither state was sustainable. Casualty reports from this period often lacked dramatic firefights. Instead, they noted delayed extractions, missed check-ins, and sudden, precise enemy engagement after long periods of inactivity. The kill was clean. Efficient. Almost surgical. Because by the time the shot was fired, the sniper had already been defeated. The jungle had done the work. Survivors carried this realization home with them. Many struggled to explain it. How do you describe an enemy that never shows itself? That never attacks directly? That simply waits until your training turns against you? Field psychologists later concluded that these experiences permanently altered how these men perceived danger. Threat was no longer something that announced itself. It was something that accumulated quietly, invisibly, until it was too late. And in the final phase of these operations, that understanding would reshape U.S. military doctrine itself. But for the men still inside the jungle, doctrine no longer mattered. Only survival did. What ultimately forced the U.S. military to confront the truth wasn't a single catastrophic failure, it was accumulation. According to post-war doctrinal reviews and declassified training revisions, the experiences of snipers in Southeast Asia exposed a fundamental flaw in conventional thinking. Danger was no longer defined by enemy action alone. It was defined by environmental interaction over time. This realization didn't come easily. For years, many of these accounts were dismissed as anecdotal. Stress reactions. Combat fatigue. But when intelligence analysts overlaid dozens of sniper losses, compromised missions, and extraction failures, a pattern emerged that could no longer be ignored. The jungle wasn't just influencing outcomes. It was shaping them. U.S. after-action syntheses concluded that the environment had functioned as a force multiplier for the enemy, one that required no logistics, no communication, and no rest. It punished predictability. It rewarded patience. And it eroded the mental resilience of even the most elite operators. Silent. Persistent. Unavoidable. As a result, sniper doctrine quietly evolved. Training began emphasizing environmental disruption awareness rather than pure concealment. New camouflage concepts focused on biological integration, not invisibility. Observation times were shortened. Rotations increased. Stillness was redefined, no longer absolute, but adaptive. These changes were written in manuals. But the real cost was written somewhere else. Veterans who survived carried the jungle with them long after they left it behind. Many reported heightened sensitivity to silence, an inability to relax in quiet rooms, a constant scanning of surroundings, even in civilian life. One former sniper described sitting in his backyard years later, suddenly overwhelmed by the absence of sound. "If nothing's moving," he said, "something's wrong." This was the jungle's final mark. It didn't just change how wars were fought. It changed how danger was understood. In Southeast Asia, the enemy proved that you don't always need to attack directly. Sometimes, you let the environment do the work. You let time do the work. You let the mind turn against itself. For those who lived through it, the jungle was never just terrain. It was a presence. A pressure. A nightmare you couldn't wake from. Today, modern military planners still study these operations not for their tactics alone, but for their lessons in psychological warfare, environmental intelligence, and human limits. Because the most dangerous threats are often the ones you can't see. And the most lasting battles are the ones that never announce themselves. If this story gave you a deeper understanding of the hidden realities of war, honor the men who endured them by supporting content that tells their stories with respect. Leave a like. Subscribe. And stay aware, because history's quietest lessons are often its most important.